Hello everybody. Today I'm going to talk to you about semiotics. This is an introduction to semiotics as an art historical methodology. I'll talk about the origins, the founding fathers, and one important contributor, implementation, how we can use semiotics to approach art historical objects, and the limitations. So what are some of this method's potential weaknesses? And to kick things off, I have a little Gary Larson cartoon here, which I think really clears things up. If only it were that easy. Alright, so let's dive into it. Helena Maud said, generally semiotics is the study of signs, or an epistemology about the existence or the actuality of signs in societal life. Semiotics is a meta-science that unifies all languages under a single framework. The fathers of this field of study were Swiss linguist Ferdinand de Saussure, on the right, and American philosopher Charles Peirce, shown here on the left. While Saussure never expressly wrote on semiotics, he did a series of lectures in his course on general linguistics where he expressed his dreams for a new field of study called semiology. The concepts he proposed in this course, which in retrospect seem fairly obvious, were very groundbreaking at the time and continue to profoundly affect how we think today. Saussure proposed that all languages use signs in order to communicate meaning. For example, the word horse would be a sign used by most English-speaking cultures to communicate about the large-toothed mammal that we are all likely thinking about right now. So Saussure proposed that these signs are composed of two parts, as we see in this oval illustration that I made here. The first is the signifier. From my earlier example, this would be the word horse, so that's the one on the top. The second is the signified. In this case, it would be the horse that could kick you, which is actually an example that Saussure used in one of his lectures. The two pieces are put together in the mind in such a seamless fashion that we never realize that they are separate from each other. This whole oval illustration would be one sign. For Saussure, these signs were purely psychological and had no actual reference to the everyday world. The only way a sign could create its intended meaning was through being different from its fellow signs. An example of this would be the words bat and bad, which only have one letter difference, but the meanings are completely different. Charles Peirce, on the other hand, he coined the term semiotics, actually, and proposed a slightly different idea of the sign. Being less caught up in the psychological and more interested in philosophical, he moved away from Saussure's sign, which was intrinsically tied to the human psyche, and created instead a triadic concept that included the sign, or representative, which in my understanding is the thing that presents the object, or represents it, if you will. It's representation in its broadest sense. And then Peirce split Saussure's signified into two pieces. The object, or referent, is the matter that channels the sign, like the word horse, and the interpretant, which is the sign's meaning, interpreted by an external force, oftentimes a human. Another key difference between Saussure and Peirce, as pointed out by Helena Maud, is that a sign for Saussure is something delivered by someone with a purpose and specific meaning intentionally. And that's a quote directly from page 7. While for Peirce, people think through the signs, which enable them to communicate with each other and give meaning to anything that exists in their environment. Also a quote from page 7. Another key contributor in this field is Roland Barthes. He took the work of the founding fathers a step further in his book Mythologies, where he says that after reading Saussure, he had acquired the conviction that, quote, by treating collective representations as sign systems, one might hope to go further than the pious show of unmasking them, and account in detail for the mystification which transforms petit bourgeois culture into a universal nature. Unquote. That's on page 8 of Mythologies. His exploration of this idea leads him to what he calls modern mythologies. He says that myth today is a type of speech, though not just any speech. It's only specific aspects of language that have undergone certain conditions in order to transform them into myth. And everything can be myth. There's no certain objects that are inevitably conducive to becoming myth. Myth is a second-order semiological system. The first system is our linguistic system, consisting of everyday language objects. Myth takes aspects of this first system in order to create the second system, which Barthes calls metalanguage. Barthes uses this second system to explain the presence of deeper systemic meanings, such as how a photo of a soldier in his barbershop made him think of the French Empire. I think that a great example of this in our world today is how the car is no longer just a four-wheeled metal mode of transportation, but through a plethora of media campaigns and advertisements, it has become more of a symbol of freedom, or in many cases, wealth or social status. These second meanings that Barthes points out, they distort the meanings of the first system by appropriating them for their own purposes. While the first system is arbitrary, the second system is always highly motivated. So implementation. This is all very interesting, right? But what does this mean for us as art historians? How can we apply these principles to the objects we study? For visual culture studies, semiotics is often used to look at advertisements, studying the sign systems inherent in a particular culture. This is usually, as I showed you with that car ad one slide earlier, closely related to kind of Barthian mythology. But since everything, practically everything, consists of signs and sign systems, semiotics can be applied across art history. I find it works especially well with collage, like this piece here, Buffalo 2 by Robert Rauschenberg, where you have so many different signs juxtaposed in a single space. Using a semiotic approach to look at this piece, you would start by naming the individual signs. The pointing finger, the eagle, the keys. From there, you would research those signs, contexts, and backgrounds. Moving on to look how they fit into larger signifying systems or mythologies. After that, you would look at how the signs are juxtaposed in relation to one another. Do these juxtapositions create new meaning? What sort of sign systems has the artist created in these juxtapositions? How does that fit in or critique the existing system or the systems where these signs were sourced from? This process can lead to very insightful readings of images if done correctly. As Gillian Rose points out in her book Visual Methodologies, it provides detailed analysis of images and is extremely useful for studying the construction of social difference through science. and that's where it's usually used. But it also has its limitations, which I'll delve into now. And there's two main limitations. Firstly, there's the question of replicability, and this is something that Rose also brings up. It's how the replicability of analysis, which stems from this problem stems from the slippery nature of science. And I think it's especially true in our post-structuralist world. If signs are constantly changing, how can anyone be sure of their reading? Another difficulty that Rose points out in her book is that in the wrong hand, semiotics, because of its complicated terminology, can lead to what she calls obscurantist texts. These state the obvious in very complicated and pretentious ways. Aside from these two weaknesses, semiotics is a very helpful methodology for delving deeply into a piece's signs and their meanings. So let me know what you guys think, and if you have any comments or pushing it further thoughts, I'd be happy to answer any of those questions. Thank you for listening.